Welcome to the Prison Post. This is our monthly policy edition hosted by CROP's Director of Business Development, Ken Oliver. As a former policy director himself, Ken invites guests who keep their fingers on the pulse of current legislation and how California's laws are both impacting currently and formerly incarcerated citizens. These thoughtful conversations provide insight into the direction that our state is moving and what we can do to help end mass incarceration while responsibly reforming our prison system.
Welcome to another edition of the Policy Post. I'm Ken Oliver. I'm blessed, and we're all blessed to have with us today Marlene Sanchez, which is the Deputy Director of the Ella Baker Center. Welcome, Marlene. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Ken. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's good to see you. A lot of listeners don't know you. I have the privilege of knowing you, so it's great to be able to hear some of your wisdom and hear you drop some of those pearls a day about policy and the state of criminal justice reform in the state of California. You're a leader and have been a leader for a lot of years now, and we all look up to you. So it's an honor to have you here today.
Thank you.
Yep. So I guess I want to start with just giving people some context and some background about who you are and how you became one of the leaders in the state of California for criminal justice reform. For those people that don't know, tell us where you're from and a little bit about your background.
Sure, I'll share a little bit about who I am. My name is Marlene Sanchez. I'm the current Deputy Director at the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights. Started this year in May during the pandemic. But my journey experienced the system on different levels. I would say that the first time that I experienced the system was when I was about 5 years old, and the police barged into our home to look for my father, who later received a 20-year sentence for drug sales. And then at the age of 11, I got in a fight at school and was arrested and caught my first case at 11 years old. And then I also got really active doing HIV and health education in the 90s. And so I really feel like I also got my feet wet in the community via harm reduction, HIV work, and also youth organizing. Wow,
that's a rich and textured history, family history that you have living over there in San Francisco with family. For you, having experienced some of the experiences that you went through and then experiencing the criminal justice system firsthand directly, what would you say was the transformation point for you when you decided to start being of service and giving back and dedicating your life to this work?
Yeah, there was a woman actually by the name of Julie Posadas, who actually came into the detention center where I was at, and I was fighting a strike, and she came in and did some training on street law, what she called street law, and I remember just being like, oh man, like this is, like nobody has come in to really game us up on this information.
Right.
Since then, I feel like that was pivotal. I mean, it definitely wasn't the only moment where I feel like I had some like awakening in terms of like my own analysis of what was happening in the world. But that was one of them. The other one was learning about Mumia while I was incarcerated and writing to him. And then later writing to my father and asking him just like how much money he was making in prison, and then learning about just the prison industrial complex and how incarceration is modern day slavery. And I feel like that was in my teen years, and I never looked back, and it definitely was like the blindfolds were taken off, and things started to really make sense, and I started to get the language to really articulate what was happening in my world and in my family. through those experiences. So really, I would say being politicized, was transformative for me. It really was. I was able to, people who knew me back then would say like, "Oh, she was so angry." I was.
That's what they always say about us, right?
Yeah, and I was like, rightfully so. I was very angry. But I was able to then channel that anger towards my fight for a more just world.
Absolutely. I want to just, if you don't mind, take it back to what you said. You said something about Mumia, right? And a lot of our listeners may not know who Mumia is, but I think it's fascinating that here you were, this young woman, politicizing and becoming conscious yourself, and you hear about this cat that was part of the Black Panthers, who's a political prisoner in Philadelphia. For those who don't know, how did you connect the dots to get involved with Mumia's case? For those of us in the movement, we know that he's heavily politicized, but for somebody who wasn't as conscious then, how did you connect the dots with Mumia and share a little bit about what inspired you to write Mumia?
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember what video I watched, but we definitely watched a video and we learned about his case, and we actually did a little bit of, we used his case to be able to dissect it and look at where the like racial biases were happening to Mumia's case. We just didn't have the language then to talk about it like that, because we were constantly practicing like what we were going to say in our own case.
Right.
But I think definitely being able to like learn about his case and see it through a lens, like a racial justice lens, really made things really clear. Like here we were, I was like 14 years old, and I can see that it was, it was racially motivated and it was unjust.
Sure.
And I think we didn't really know what to do. And so I just wrote to him.
That's great, and I'm sure that your letter moved him. He gets thousands of letters from people all over the country, but to have someone who has an active mind and is looking to get into the movement like you to get a letter, I know that was inspiring to him. It had to be. I have a personal connection with you, kind of vicariously through All of Us or None. I'm a proud member of All of Us or None, and when I came home from doing 24 years in prison, All of Us or None / Legal Services for Prisoners with Children was an organization that embraced me and gave me a job and a shot to actually get out there and use my chops and my talents to kind of get active in the movement. And you're on the board of that organization, and you also are one of the founding members of All of Us or None. So to me, that's very inspirational to know that you're part of an organization and part of leadership that gives people chances to get into organizing, to get into policy work coming out of prison. There aren't a lot of organizations that do that and make that a priority. And so can you tell us a little bit about the conversation that you had initially when you co-founded All of Us or None, and what kind of inspired you to be 10 toes down with that?
Yes, many moons ago. Definitely remember having a conversation with Dorsey, one of my mentors, about a retreat that Peace Development Fund was going to put together. And he was going to bring together a whole bunch of folks who've been doing this work, like Susan Burton and George Galvis and a few other folks who are also close friends and mentors to this retreat. It was a 2-day retreat in Oakland. And I remember telling Dorsey, like, well, I need to co-facilitate with you because like, we can't forget about the young people. And I remember always, I did a lot of work in juvenile detention centers and going into like the DJJ, and, those places felt like, mini prisons, and a lot of young people were coming home and not really connecting to the work that was happening. And so I remember talking to Dorsey about co-facilitating and then just bringing in like a ton of young people to the retreat.
Right.
And so that is in that retreat. I mean, we didn't know what was going to come out of that retreat. We were doing some long-term planning, but definitely All of Us or None was born out of that retreat. And some of the first goals was that like nothing about us without us, and that like we were going to form form this movement, that it wasn't going to be another nonprofit, that we were going to do movement building, because we know that in movement building we see more long-lasting change than we do in like a 2-3 year campaign or a policy win, right? That it's through movement building that we are going to be able to build bridges and make long-lasting change. And I don't know, I want to say like 20 years later, we're still at it.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, what's dope about that story is that there wasn't a door for the youth, and you made a door. Like you told Dorsey, like, you don't have a door for me, but I'm gonna make a door, and I need to make this happen. So that's part of being a real life soldier in the movement, and you made it happen. That's probably why you're such a valiant leader today. You've come a long way since then. You said 20 years ago, or approximately 20 years ago, and now you're the deputy director at the Ella Baker Center, and a highly esteemed leader in the movement. Tell us a little bit about what you do at the Ella Baker Center and why you chose the Ella Baker Center to continue this work and what you're doing.
Yeah, so the Ella Baker Center is an organization that has been around a long time as well. It's about to celebrate 25 years. I do remember being a young person and joining campaigns to close youth prisons, many years ago. And so the Ella Baker Center, when I saw the position and saw the opportunity, it felt like a perfect fit to be able to do both the organizing and policy work and continue to do the organizational development work that I've been doing for the last 15 years. It just felt like a perfect fit. Ella Baker Center has a strong racial justice analysis. It is named after a fierce and brilliant civil rights leader, Ella Baker. We actually just celebrated Ella Baker's heavenly birthday, and
Right.
her birthday was on Sunday, and we did a special virtual birthday party for her on Monday. And really, Ella Baker really represents a lot of the leadership development work that I also feel really committed to. The way that Ella Baker didn't just lead, but she made sure others led with her. I think is something that I'm continue to be inspired by. Is that as leaders, we got to constantly be working to develop other leaders. And it isn't just about one leader, it is about many leaders and different type of leaders, whether that be young people, older people, transgender people, women, men, that it's going to really take all of us, and that everybody has innate leadership. And so I think in that spirit, Ella Baker Center is really working to really lead policy change, and most recently has developed a really strong network of folks, leaders inside of prisons who are helping to really lead our policy work. And so even as leaders who've been in the work a long time, we have to take a step back and make sure that folks who haven't had an opportunity to lead or haven't had a voice in the policy realm or in the movement really get that opportunity to lead as well.
We really appreciate that, Marlene, because there's not enough people all the time that get the opportunity to participate in this work. It's important work. There's hundreds of thousands of people, millions in some cases, that we're fighting for on a daily basis. Our youth, the women. That's an important piece of the work that I've learned since I've come home. Because being a man myself and being part of a system that has, in the peak when I was in prison, up to 170,000 people in men's prisons in California. And what I learned from having conversations with people like Amika and people like Daniela and people like Amina and April Grayson and Susan and Vanya is the importance of centering and having conversations about women in this criminal justice movement. Because when we think about criminal justice conversations, typically they center around the male population. And I learned so much working in the same offices with CCWP and learning from people like Hamdia and others that I named. I'd like for you to talk a little bit about the importance of women's voices and the centering of women's issues in the criminal justice movement, I think it's important to always lift that up, and I'd like for you to be able to talk about it and why you think it's important.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely been like a long time coming. And I feel like like prioritizing women has been excluded because of the numbers. The numbers. I remember years back when we were fighting for girls who were incarcerated, we constantly heard things like, "But the percentage of girls is so small in comparison to men." And really, it isn't about like a comparison. We know that the needs are truly different, and that if women are not at the forefront of this movement, it's just a missed opportunity. It is a missed opportunity, and the whole movement suffers. Not just women, but the entire move. It's a missed opportunity for the entire movement to really look at things through an intersection. I think that is what women bring to this like intersection of like the whole family, the whole community. You can't talk about women and not talk about the entire family. Many times we talk about men and men's issues, and the entire family conversation is not in that conversation. It should be, and that's why it's important that like we center women, we center entire families. We're constantly looking at gender justice as a more expansive way to like really address like all of our human rights, right? And so that like gender justice really encompasses all of those intersections together. That encompasses our trans family members, our gender nonconforming family members, and all of the conversations around decriminalizing sex work, and like all of those conversations need to be front and center if we're talking about liberation. And so like if we're talking about a specific policy, I think that it's a little different, and folks got to be really specific with like who they're talking about. But when we're talking about movement building, we need to be inclusive, and we need to be able to be more expansive and include all of those folks in that conversation.
Absolutely. And I think that we've seen that in various campaigns, like even as recently as for voting rights. Most of the testimonials and stories center around men, but obviously it's a very important issue for women to have their voting rights too. And there's tens of thousands of women in California who've been disenfranchised before. So, every chance I get, I remind people that we need to lift up the stories of the women that are affected, because in many cases, women have it harder than men in incarceration. And in many cases, women are incarcerated as a result of situations and dealings with men, whether that be, domestic violence issues, or whether that be, drug issues where they had a boyfriend or a man that was involved with the drug trade. So I think lifting that up is important. Do you think that this historical election that happened a couple months ago with Kamala Harris being the first woman and the first woman of color, which I think was the central story for me. Like, I didn't care about Trump and I didn't care about Biden, and that wasn't a conversation personally that I was excited about. I was really excited about what happened with the vice presidency, right? And the historic nature of that. Do you think that the issue of the centralization of women will be easier now that a woman and a woman of color has been voted into such a high position, or do you think it will have little effect, or what's your position on that, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, it has a huge effect. I got to work with Kamala when she was in San Francisco, and I've seen her politics evolve, and she is consistently changing and growing, and have definitely seen her position on things really, really shift. And I think this was historical to see a woman of color be like vice president, and I know everybody has a plot like she's going to be president soon, and but what it does, definitely brought a lot of like hope to folks, and just there was a lot of talk about like all of the, all the young women of color who are really looking as this historical day as like this is something that's obtainable now because she has made it to that position of power. And yeah, no, I think it's huge effect. I think, I think I think we will still need to hold Kamala accountable, but I think that there'll be it'll be different in terms of not having to explain why certain things are important, yet still holding her accountable to the kind of change that we want. I think it's a little different when we're constantly having to explain like why certain issues are important. And that changes things when you have a woman of color in that position.
Absolutely. I think what's interesting to me is that, especially from people in our movement, you mentioned a word that touched me, which was evolve. You talked about her evolving. And I think that anybody who looks at Kamala in 1993 sees a very different Kamala than we see in 2020. And we oftentimes in the criminal justice movement ask for forgiveness. We ask for people to look at us in different ways. We ask for people to understand what redemption means and what it looks like. But then sometimes we don't often afford that to other people, right? And so whether you agree with Kamala or not, you have to buy into the fact, at least if you're one of us in the movement, that people deserve the opportunity and space to evolve. Mm-hmm. And, it fascinates me when I hear people that, just spent a lot of time in prison, get out, they're asking for people to look at them in a different way. And they expect that in the movement, but then they're not willing to give that to people that they may disagree with. And I think that it's important for us not to copy the structures and systems of the people that we fight against every day, the oppressors, right? We have to make sure that we get out of those mindsets of judgment and allow people space to do good work. And I think that she will do good work. I think she sent a message to Black women and women of color all over the country. And I think that she's on a seat that she recognizes she's being looked at and will be held accountable. And I want to give her the benefit of the doubt until she disearns that, so to speak, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, so I think that's important. I want to talk a little bit about criminal justice reform in California and what happens after criminal justice reform, if you don't mind. Because I was in the forefront of policy. I did a lot of policy when I was at LSPC, and I got the opportunity to work with a lot of organizations from LA, all the way up to Sacramento. Mm-hmm. And we pushed a lot of law changes, and California has seen a lot of law changes in the criminal justice space for the last 10 years, right? But what I didn't hear a lot of conversation about is what happens after people are released, right? And I think we all got caught on our toes a little bit when COVID happened, the pandemic happened, and tens of thousands of people were getting out. And, the prison population for the first time is about 90,000, is probably going to go to about 80,000 in 2021. I'm wondering, are we doing enough as a community, as organizations, to put pressure on Sacramento legislators, the governor, to build infrastructures to support people's opportunity to succeed? Because I think the last thing that any of us wants is for 2 or 3 years from now, because we don't have those infrastructures in place, like people are returning back and getting caught up in that cycle of recidivism because they've been pushed to the edges. And so I'm interested in hearing your perspective on that and what we could be doing, or what you think we may be doing to support people that are being released from all of our work, in many cases, the work we're doing on the front end.
Yeah, I mean, this year, 2020 was a tough year for many reasons, and also like just policy wise as well. But we also had some great wins, and we're able to pass some great policies. So we had some momentum there. One of those bills was the juvenile realignment. And I mention that because that bill is really also going to ensure that money comes back to the county, that as we are looking at closing institutions or reducing the number of prisons, people in some of these prisons, that we are looking at the numbers. We are looking at the budget, and we are seeing how much is actually going to go back into the community. And so I think we need to be doing more of that, and consistently looking at like what the true cost of reentry is, and in comparison to, we know that is like not even in comparison to like what it costs to incarcerate
Absolutely.
someone, right? Like I know just in California alone, it's like almost $500,000 to incarcerate a person for a year. It's ridiculous. Right. Part of that is because as the crime rate is going down, and as there is less and less young people in those institutions, the institution still has to account for inflation. Like as long as we have these kind of institutions, then we are not using the money wisely, right? Because it is just sucking it up. And so I think with reentry, similar, I think we need to definitely be looking at like what it truly costs to like support folks when they're coming home. What does that infrastructure really need to be? And also not assuming, I think there's also this assumption that like people have nowhere to go. I've been hearing a lot of that with some of the work around, calling for release of folks because of COVID, right? And we know that there is people who can be released who actually do have places to go and do have families, but the family lacks support and resources in the community that sometimes folks are going back to lacks those resources. I mean, there are certain cities that we know are inundated with resources and others that have that are just like depleted in terms of their infrastructure to even provide housing and food and jobs and, just the basic stuff. And so I definitely feel like we need to be having a conversation around like what does that infrastructure really look like, that is centered through the perspective of folks who are still currently incarcerated and folks who have recently come home. And we need to really be listening to them and asking them what they need, and then helping to really build that regardless of where folks are going.
Right. Because it's interesting because, this year was so reactionary in reference to like things like Project Room Key, which turned into Project Home Key, and almost $1 billion is being given to put people in hotels and motels, which is transitory living. But no one was having conversations about how you pathway people into long-term sustainable housing. I mean, a hotel room is almost equivalent to a large cell in many cases. And no one was talking about what that would look like after the hotel and the motel stuff went away. And so, in the spaces that I frequent, I try to have conversations about what does this infrastructure look like? And it's more than just the housing component, right, for people. That's a key component and one of the biggest components. But,
yeah, it's a basic need.
Yeah, and then you talked about jobs, and because the reentry system is so siloed, what's interesting is that you have a lot of these pay-for-play placement agencies. I don't want to call out people's names, that they quickly usher people into these minimum wage jobs, and they get placement fees. They're making money off of putting us in these jobs. But in the Bay Area, I know for me, even when I was working at LSPC, like I couldn't afford to live in Oakland, right, on my own and pay rent in a decent neighborhood where I didn't have to worry about, getting into something when I stepped outside my door. And so how do we fix that, or what do you see is a fix for that to put people in a position where they can be self-sustainable at some point, rather than just a handout where we're hand to mouth feeding people for a year and then kicking them to the curb?
Yeah, no, we definitely need some pipelines from like prison to some of those careers, because there's some like we've known this for a long time, right? We got some like brilliant minds behind bars, and some folks who would be great leaders in when they come home. They're leaders now while they're currently incarcerated. One thing we're doing at the Ella Baker Center is we're going to be launching a Inside Outside Fellowship, and so we are doing rounds of second interviews now, but there's going to be a fellow on the inside and a fellow on the outside, helping to lead some of our policy work, and really create some pipelines too, and like build resumes and create some pipelines even before folks get out. And that we're not even looking at that as like, we want you to come work at Ella Baker Center. We want you to go wherever you need to go. Because like true liberation is about people having also a choice and opportunity and a way to be able to get into what they want to do, and not just right into the nonprofit industrial complex, but that if they want to, that's a pathway too, and that there's an opportunity, and that there's also a lot of policy organizations that need to be looking to folks on the inside, and actually compensate folks for their expertise, and support them even before they come home. And I think that because there's been a missed opportunity to really engage folks in the reentry conversation, that we end up with these kind of programs that are like piecemealed, and just provide temporary relief, but not really work towards self-determination. I think that we need to really be, the long haul is around like self-determination and making sure that folks have what they need to be able to live whatever life they want to live. And so, yeah, I think, but I think it's a problem with the way that a lot of these programs are organized, because they are on these like program cycles and they are tied to certain deliverables with certain funding. But what would it really look like to create an infrastructure that isn't, that is about building self-determination, and that it is about folks being able to not just survive, but to really thrive.
That's right. Self-determination is what freedom is about, right? In many cases, I mean, the ability to be able to do what you want to do. And, big props to the Ella Baker Center for creating programs that actually live up to that mantra and create space for people to be lifted up. So, we appreciate the work that you're doing there.
I just would want to say that it is created and led by James King, who is
Big James. We got to give props to James, right?
He was the architect of this fellowship, and I'm just like in awe with like all the ways that that he is thinking about this fellowship, and not just being a program, but that it is being that is a real leadership pipeline into this work, even before folks come home, and we're even thinking like, even if somebody doesn't come home right away, right, that they still deserve the opportunity to like engage and to be leaders in this work, even if folks still have 10 years on their sentence, 20 years on their sentence. That doesn't mean that that it is about everybody's leadership.
Absolutely. We appreciate that. James is a brilliant mind. The Ella Baker Center is lucky to have James, just like he's lucky to have you there. So we want to give props to James too. We'd be remiss without talking about what happened in 2020 in policy in California. So I kind of want to get your perspective on what happened in the general landscape of California policy, but then also talk about stuff that you all did at Ella Baker Center. And then maybe after we're done with that, we could talk a little bit about what you guys' plans are for 2021 and some of your visions.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was an interesting year. It almost felt like a roller coaster ride.
It did, right?
But we had some really great successes. We were able to pass the Racial Justice Act, and which was huge. It's historical. It asserts civil rights into the courtroom and creates what we call like it adds the justice piece to the courtroom, and it really looks at biases and doesn't allow for biases to be racial biases to be used when sentencing and convictions. So that was huge. That was a historical. That was almost going to. It almost was going to die, and then it got brought.
I remember. It got down the first time, right? And then it got brought back alive. Was that a budget trailer?
No, it wasn't, but it was a, I think a lot of what was happening around the world and around the country definitely had an impact on that bill. Then there was a bill to get rid of some of the fees, the administrative fees. There's about like 21 fees called families over fees. And that was an economic justice bill that was passed that eliminates 21 administrative fees related to the criminal justice system. And this is a one that, again, like really looks at like family, the impact of families, the impact of the criminal justice system on families. And then there was, this is a huge one. I mean, LSPC has been working on this one for many, many years. And this is the one around elder parole. And it made some changes to that. And then there was the juvenile realignment bill as well. That was huge because Ella Baker Center has been working on closing youth prisons for many years, and we're successful in closing 2. And so now these are the last 3 that are left to be closed. And that it's about closing it the right way, and making sure that the resources, we all know that the system likes to reinvent itself and recreate itself. And so it makes sure that the resources after closing these prisons also follow these young people and come back to the community, and create some local oversight to make sure that that is happening. And then just a lot of COVID relief support. Some folks on our team have been really active in the Stop San Quentin outbreak, and making sure that, calling for also 50% reduction and in Santa Rita, and making sure that folks who are pretrial are home. And so a lot of our work in 2020 went into immediate like COVID support on the inside, and also making sure folks had resources and that kind of stuff as well. And then right now, folks are working to demand releases and not transfers of vulnerable populations in San Quentin. I think there's a petition where folks were collecting 2,000 signatures. As of today, I think we're almost at 3,000 in terms of holding the governor accountable to not transferring folks during this time. And then, of course, like many other folks, we were supporting Prop 17.
Hey, Prop 17, that's right.
17 passed, which is great. That's a huge win. And then Prop 15 didn't win, but we still like really worked really hard on that bill, on that proposition. I mean, and then of course opposing Prop 20, which was a win to make sure that like that didn't pass, and that was a proposition that was basically trying to undo all of our good work for the last years.
That was crazy. Cooper's a nut, no disrespect, but I don't know what he was thinking about. The timing was bad on so many fronts for him to try to push something like that. It was just unjust all the way around. I'm curious about what you thought, Marlene, in reference to what I consider to be somewhat of a debacle, Prop 25, and what you thought about the flip-flopping that occurred from 2018 to now, and the flip-flopping that occurred in our own industry, so to speak.
Yeah, there was, I think Prop 25, there was a lot of some internal disagreements on Prop 25. And I'm definitely haven't been as active in that. But here we are.
Yeah. For those that don't know what Prop 25 is, that's the bail reform in California that started out as SB 10 and recently was pushed back via referendum from the bail and insurance company. So as a result, 50,000 people at least, mostly Black and brown people, will spend their Christmas and holiday season in a county jail rather than being released this year. So hopefully we can double back in 2021 or 2022 and find some other type of alternative to the cash bail system.
I think just one last thing around that. I mean, I think it was also like a conversation around like pretrial and kind of the way to really like roll that out, that there was more disagreement there than actually wanting to see the bail industry eliminated. And I think it was a difference in strategy, and it divided some of our folks. And so, hoping there's another opportunity to come back and fight for that. But we'll see.
We definitely have work to do in reference to the risk assessment model, and maybe if we can collectively get on the same page and make some progress towards that, we can come together, because we can definitely go farther working together than we can when we have that infighting type of stuff, but we're disagreeing in the way that we do. So that's a good segue into 2021, because I'm hoping that we're able to put down a united front to continue this pendulum swing that I call it for criminal justice reform, and continue to get our people released from prison and make California a more just and humane place for specifically Black and brown people mostly, which represents about 85% of the California prison system. What's next for the Ella Baker Center and you all in reference to policy?
So folks have been working really hard on their 2021 policy agenda. I know that it hasn't really been released yet, but I know one of the things that folks are definitely talking about is going back, is definitely working on the Racial Justice Act and kind of how that's going to be rolled out, because implementation is key. And so we are going to be continuing to implement some of the bills that we passed. But then for 2021, going back for retroactivity of the Racial Justice Act and making sure that folks who've already been sentenced and convicted actually have an opportunity to go back to court to challenge that bias. And so we are going to go after retroactivity for next year.
Marlene, can we talk about just a little bit the Racial Justice Act, because the Racial Justice Act slid under the radar for a lot of people, and a lot of our listeners are family members of people that are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people. And for those that don't know, to me, it's mind-blowing that we now have the Racial Justice Act and the work you all put down to make this happen, which I think creates a right to sue or a right for relief if you can show that your sentence was affected by a racial bias. And there's plenty of data that's come out over the last decade or 2 decades to show the disparity in sentences between races. Can you talk a little bit about the Racial Justice Act and what it actually is and how it can affect our loved ones? Yeah,
definitely. And right now, it's not retroactive. We lost that piece, but it was a significant win to be able to have it go into effect on January 1st, 2021. And so as of January 1st, 2021, if you are fighting a case, they cannot use racial biases and against your conviction. It is going to be something that is definitely now considered. The way that I think about it is like we have these protections in like employment, right? Like you can't be discriminated against for a job because of your race. We have this in like education settings, and like you can't be discriminated against because of your race. But we don't have these protections in the criminal justice system, which we know are like, it is like the driver of how many people are incarcerated. Like, you know, and so it's huge. I think all of the work around how exactly that's going to roll out is happening now. There's already a group of folks working really closely on like the implementation of that, and like the burden of proof and like who's going to have what. And, you know, I'm definitely just, you know, in awe of like all the amazing work that folks have been doing around this. And the work has just started. It was just like the fact that this was passed and now the work can begin. And then next year, we're going to go after folks who've already been we're going to go after retroactivity for folks who've already been sentenced, already been convicted, who have a case, and an opportunity to go back to court. You know, I think for many of the folks who are currently incarcerated and loved ones, this provides some hope for them to be able, and something to like a tool to use to go back and fight. We're constantly looking for tools that folks can use to like fight for their own freedom. And so this is going to be a huge tool for families, for attorneys, and for incarcerated people to go back and fight once we go back to retroactivity. But right now, it only is for folks who are going to be fighting a case in 2021.
How difficult, Marlene, do you see it for us to actually get the retroactive piece? Because there are, I'm sure you're familiar with Garcon and what he came out with when he got elected. He's talking about rolling back and allowing people to be resentenced who have enhancements, which is about 80% of people's times. I would imagine that by advancing petitions that can show racial bias sentences, that more progressive DAs, maybe like Bodine or Garcon, may be willing to look at the petitions anyway without the retroactive piece. So there's two pieces I want to know. A, how hard is it going to be? And do you think there may be some leeway at a DA's discretion if we can make a case to actually allow people to be resentenced?
That's a good question. I don't have the answers for all of those, but I know that in 2021, we are going to go after enhancements as well. And one in particular, like gang enhancements. I think that one is long overdue as well, and also shows some racial biases. But I think of all the enhancements, there is going to be some opportunity to really show how those are racially motivated to, people's sentences.
Yeah, we need to repeal the STEP Act, right? We need to repeal that act all the way around that is responsible for gang injunctions and so many sentences.
Yeah, the last two I'll mention, but I know that folks are still doing research around some of the work for 2021 is around the ending felony murder for LWOP, and then phone and store cost. There's always I think the economic justice bills are also really critical to continue to make shifts for entire communities and families, right? And really challenge the impact of incarceration. And then programming inside of prisons is something that we are also going to be working on because this is important to folks on the inside that that we want to make sure that folks who still have to live in these kind of I call them institutions of torture, that folks who still have to live there also deserve an opportunity and make sure that, and programming is important for folks in terms of how they do their time and survive in these places. And so programming is something that we're also going to be working on as well. 2021.
Well, that's great. We look forward to seeing all the great work that you and James and everybody else at Ella Baker is going to do in 2021 and continue the work that you did in 2020. We appreciate the gains that you made, especially with the Racial Justice Act. I'm just super hyped about that. That's it's long overdue and something that should have been instituted in criminal justice, as you mentioned, for decades now. So I want to pivot just a little bit and talk about you personally, right? If you don't mind, put you on the hot seat a little bit. What do you see as deputy director now? I mean, you're in a super lead position. What is your vision for Ella Baker Center in this work, and what would you like to see as a leader? And then, if you can tell me what you'd like to see for yourself outside of Ella Baker self, like your long-term visions and goals, and give some inspiration to the formerly incarcerated men and women that are listening to this show now, because I think you're a great inspiration.
Thank you. So 2021 for Ella Baker Center, we're going to be rolling out our strategic plan as well, and really sharing our evolving definition of how we build power and continue to build power. We've some of the stuff that I'm committed to in this new role. It is a new role at the Ella Baker Center, and one of the things that I'm definitely committed to is leadership development of Black women, formerly incarcerated people, young people, like Ella Baker, that creating an organization that, what does it really mean to have a culture of leadership development within an organization? How do we make sure that there is opportunities for folks who are also not a part of our organization, right, who are members, because we are a membership organization. What does it really mean for our members to have leadership within our organization? So that stuff is really important to me. The other thing that's important is that we really walk our talk, that we're an organization that doesn't just have a great mission and the great communications, but actually that our culture represents the change that we want to see. I've been in the nonprofit work for many years, and I feel like sometimes we get lost in the like hustle and bustle of like just running a nonprofit, that we forget why we got into this work in the first place. And sometimes why we started nonprofits and didn't just go work for another nonprofit. I heard people say like, well, I started a nonprofit because, I was sick and tired of, kind of like how things went down in certain nonprofits, right? Or having no power or no leadership within that organization. So I went off and I started my own. And I don't think we need to create more nonprofits, but we need to change the culture of nonprofits. And the Ella Baker Center has already been shifting its culture. The staff, there's a union, and so there's like power in the staff because of the union. It is one of the things that attracted me to the organization. I was like, that's what's up. Like the staff, even though I'm not in the union, I'm in the management position. To me, it's still like if we are about building power, then that is part of it. That is how workers build power, is they unionize. And so I'm really excited to take it to the next level and really create a culture that we're really proud of, and that really models the change that we want to see in the world. Right? Yeah.
So important to walk that and not just pay lip service to it. And the fact that you're developing programs and you're constantly thinking about centralizing the voices of the up and coming leaders, the youth, the people coming out of prison. Wow, that's dope. And I really appreciate you speaking on that, because I think it needs to be spoken on. And I think people need to hear it in a real way. So thank you for that, Marlene. What's up with you though, Marlene? I mean, what for your personal vision and trajectory? I mean, what do you see for yourself long term? Are you married to the movement forever? Do you have other aspirations? I mean, I know you have a family, a beautiful family. What do you want and where are you going?
Yes, I am. So any day now, I am waiting for my first grandchild to be born. So I am super excited about that. Like,
congratulations.
I can't wait to just like shelter in place with a new baby that isn't mine, where I can sleep at night. So I'm just super excited for my family and for my son, and just seeing my family healthy and growing. And I think I am married to the movement forever. And definitely in this for the long haul, but part of this work is really about developing other leaders, and creating other opportunities so that we are not, so I don't have to do the same work forever, right? I can move into other roles and support other folks. And, and so I'm definitely excited to just, be able to do good work at the Ella Baker Center, so that other people like James and other folks at the organization can then, step to their amazing leadership that they're already in. And I'm hoping, I hope I get to travel this year, because I haven't gone to any, well, I've gone somewhere. But
so it's like we're doing SHU programs, right? We're doing glamorized solitary confinement programs in many cases. I mean, being locked up in the house, right?
No, it doesn't compare. It does
I know. It's a high class version of being locked down all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm hoping for that in 2021. And then also, sharing more work around the impacts of families on incarceration, and like, some of the history of like family separation, and like how we can learn from some of that to really figure out like what does our work moving forward look like, as we take an approach that really encompasses the entire family and community. So I think to your earlier point around like women and men, I really want us to see a shift that we talk about families and communities, when we're talking about, like what, and we're like reimagining like what's possible, right? That we're taking into account what does the whole community really need to thrive. So moving more away from like the individual to more of a community narrative. So like really shifting the narrative. And then I think for I'm super excited for like the youth justice work and to organizers and folks who've been doing this work for like 20 plus years, to really reimagine with young people and other folks, like what does a new infrastructure look like? Because we have an opportunity right now to do so, and to really imagine a ecosystem and supportive system for young people that moves away from punishment and looks more towards youth development and healing for our movement.
Investing in people, restoring lives, healing communities, reshifting some of those $50 billion of law enforcement money back into people, right, and communities, and making sure we put people in position to thrive. So we definitely need to keep our foot on the gas in reference to those dollars and where those dollars go, especially with the closure of the DJJs and making sure that all that money doesn't end up with CPOC and others that are just trying to reinvent system power structures, right? I was involved with several conversations where, people were acknowledging that now the money's shifting from the CCPOA to CPOC. They're becoming a stronger union force to distribute services to our youth, and those don't always look like community services, as we know. So that sounds like a great plan. I'm congratulating you on having a grandchild. I know that you're happy about that, and as you should be. I can't wait to see pictures on your social media because I know you'll be showing them, right? So we appreciate having you here today, Marlene. Hopefully we can come back later on in the year and or later in 2021 and have another conversation about what you're doing and where you're at and what the Ella Baker Center are doing. We appreciate having you today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Prison Post, a production of the CROP organization. We'll be sharing more stories from the world of prison reform and restorative justice, so please join us. You can listen to The Prison Post on all major podcasting platforms. Subscribe to our video cast on YouTube and like us on Facebook at The Prison Post and at Creating Restorative Opportunities and Programs.